Chapter 3: Submission of the State Economy to Monopoly. 1. Monopolies and the state budget. Ownership and control. The bourgeois state does not control the main means of production, which are owned by the capitalist class. The state acts as an apparatus for collecting taxes and holding significant funds as state budget revenues and properties, such as industrial enterprises, land, railways, and military supplies. State economy in imperialism. During the era of imperialism, capitalist contradictions intensify, particularly with the growth of militarism. This leads to a rapid increase in the state economy, which becomes a source of enrichment for monopolies. The absorption of monopolies into the state economy subordinates the state apparatus to monopolies, maximizing their profits. Monopolies and the state budget. The state budget is crucial for monopolies as it provides loans, subsidies, and profitable government contracts. The growth of the state apparatus, militarism, and frequent wars cause a sharp increase in state budgets. U.S. budget dynamics. Pre-20th century. American budgets were relatively small and typically balanced. 20th century. The imperialism era sees a dramatic rise in U.S. budgets and deficits, especially during World War I and World War II. Post-World War I. The U.S. becomes the largest creditor of European countries and maintains budget deficits. Economic crises, 1929 to 1933, and World War II lead to increased deficits. Post-World War II. Budgets remain high due to efforts by monopolists to inflate them and provide subsidies. Military spending, especially related to the Korean War, causes further increases. Budget trends in other countries. England. Expenditure rises sharply during World War I and World War II. Post-war budgets remain high due to militarization and economic crises. Japan. Budget expenditures increase significantly from 1894-95 to 1945-46, driven by wars and militarization. Revenue growth. The rapid growth of state budgets necessitates increased taxation. During imperialism, the bourgeois state concentrates a growing portion of national income through state budget revenues, particularly during wars. National income concentration. The expenditure portion of the U.S. federal budget grew from about 2% of national income in 1913 to over 50% during World War II, and in recent years, it has absorbed about a quarter of national income. Main source of income. Taxes are the primary source of income for the bourgeois state, essential for funding various societal functions and structures, as noted by Marx. Increased tax activity during imperialism. The bourgeois state's activity in collecting taxes intensifies during periods of imperialism and capitalism's general crisis. U.S. tax growth. Pre-World War I tax budgets ranged from $500 to $650 million annually. During World War I, tax revenues surged to $4,482 million in 1918-19. Between the world wars, taxes remained high. World War II caused unprecedented tax increases, with 1944-45 revenues 8.5 times higher than 1938-39. Post-war tax reductions were minimal. 1946-47 taxes fell by only 14.3% compared to 1944-45. From 1947-48, taxes rose again, surpassing World War II levels by 1950-51. England's tax growth. World War II increased tax revenues from £896.4 million in 1938-39 to £3,201.9 million in 1945-46. Post-war taxation continued to rise, reaching £4,438.7 million in 1952-53, exceeding 1945-46 levels by 38.6% and 1938-39 levels nearly fivefold. Reasons for tax increase. Means of exploitation. Taxes evolved from merely sustaining the state apparatus to becoming a major method of exploiting workers and enriching the financial oligarchy in the imperialist era. Class-based taxation. In capitalist countries, taxes are class-based. Lenin noted that indirect taxes disproportionately burden workers, with capitalists evading taxes and passing them on to consumers. Persistent tax pressure. The financial oligarchy maintains high tax pressure post-war, resisting relinquishing this enrichment source. Connection with public debt. Taxes remain high due to their link with public debt. During wars and crises, budget deficits are covered by government loans, further increasing taxation and public debt. Growth of public debt. Between 1913 and 1952, public debt in England increased nearly 40 times, and in the USA, it increased more than 220 times. U.S. per capita government debt rose from $12.27 in 1913 to $1,848.60 in 1945. Major stages in the growth of public debt were the First and Second World Wars and the economic crisis of 1929 to 1933. Impact on working people. Growth of public debt leads to increased exploitation and impoverishment of workers in capitalist countries. Workers bear the burden of war expenses through taxes used to pay interest and repay loans. Public debt financing increases the tax burden on workers. Government loans and taxes. Government loans are portrayed as acts of patriotism but are a means for monopolists to enrich themselves. Loans require increased taxes, shifting financial pressure onto workers. State budget as a wealth transfer tool. The state budget is used to transfer funds from workers to the ruling classes, especially the financial oligarchy. Historical instances, such as in France and Russia, show exploitation of state spending for private gain. Imperialism and state finances. In the era of imperialism, the state budget becomes a major source of profit for the wealthy. Businessmen engage in fraudulent schemes, with public finances used for subsidies and support to monopolists. Crisis measures and corporate support. During economic crises, governments spend billions from the budget to support trusts and banks. The U.S. created the Reconstruction Finance Corporation during the 1929 to 1933 crisis to support struggling enterprises. Budget expenditures on crisis measures. U.S. budget allocations for crisis measures included billions of dollars, primarily benefiting monopolists rather than the unemployed. From 1931 to 1938, these allocations often exceeded 50% of total budget expenditures. Monopolistic influence on state finances. State finances are managed by special bodies tied to monopolies, ensuring funds benefit the financial elite. Finance ministers are often big bankers and businessmen with ties to monopolistic associations. Bourgeois state spending. The largest expenditure for bourgeois states is military spending. Lenin observed that the state prioritizes military expenses over cultural development. Increase in military spending. In the era of imperialism, the share and absolute size of military expenditures in capitalist countries' budgets increase, especially during wartime. U.S. military expenditures. Between the world wars, U.S. military expenditures reached up to 18% of budget expenditures. During World War II, they reached 91% in 1943-44. Proportion of government expenditures. During World War II, military expenditures absorbed 80 to 95% of government expenditures in capitalist countries, significantly influencing budget growth. Impact on national income. Military spending consumed a large portion of national income. Despite exaggerated national income figures, military spending was 50 to 60% in the U.S. and England during World War II, higher in Japan and Germany. Profits from monopolies. The financial oligarchy profits from inflated military budgets, using them to regulate the economy for self-interest, redistributing national income toward large monopolies. Military contracts. Military budgets are funneled into monopolies via contracts for weapon supplies and military structures. Between 1940 and 1945, U.S. military expenses were $271.8 billion, with monopolies receiving $175.1 billion in contracts from 1940 to 1944. Manufacturing for war. In 1943, 62.2% of manufacturing products were for military use. At war's peak, 70 to 80% of military expenses went to military orders. Monopolistic competition. Monopolistic associations compete fiercely for military orders, with larger ones dominating. This competition often occurs in political spheres, influenced by monopoly leaders. Influence on government. Military economic bodies linked to monopolies influence ministries, subverting state funds and control. Monopolies fill these bodies with their protégés. Interest in militarism. The financial oligarchy benefits from military spending, promoting wars and militarism for profit. Post-war military spending. After World War II, military spending decreased but remained higher than expected, especially in the U.S., where it soon began to rise again. Plans for future wars. During World War II, U.S. imperialists planned for a Third World War to establish American monopoly dominance, leading to increased post-war military spending. Post-war U.S. military spending. After World War II, U.S. military spending remained approximately 10 times higher than pre-war levels, averaging over one-third of all government spending. By 1952-53, U.S. military spending reached $47,455 million, constituting nearly 64% of government spending, influenced by preparations for a new World War and the Korean War. Military spending in other countries. The aggressive foreign policy of the U.S. led to increased military spending in European capitalist states, including England, which saw military expenditures rise to £1,600 million by 1953-54, 3 times higher than pre-war levels. Hidden military expenditures. Budgets included items related to war preparations not classified under military expenditures, such as international affairs and financing in the U.S. budget, which supported loans and military aid to countries in U.S.-led blocs. Support for U.S. allies. An increasing share of U.S. military expenditures was directed to armament of partners in aggressive blocs. 23% in 1950-51, 43% in 1951-52, and 62% in 1952-53. Additional budget items included investments in military production, atomic weapons, and strategic reserves, totaling $2,710 million in 1952-53. Monopolists' gains from military spending. Large sums from military budgets subsidized monopolies through lucrative contracts and orders. In England, military production and research constituted 40.9% of military spending in 1950-51 and 56% in 1953-54, with significant investments in the metalworking industry. Public debt and monopolists' enrichment. The growth of public debt benefited monopolists, who were major holders of government loans, leading to increased tax burdens on workers. U.S. monopolists significantly increased investments in government securities from $25.5 billion in 1938 to $129.9 billion in 1945. Impact of wars on public debt. Wars and economic crises drove up public debt and interest costs. The bulk of public debt in capitalist countries was held by monopolies, enriching them through interest payments and lucrative military contracts. Mechanism of government loans. Government loans served as a tool to transfer wealth from workers to monopolists, with monopolists reaping benefits during and after the war. Banks and financial institutions profited from commissions and conditions attached to external loans, often requiring loan funds to be spent on goods from the lending country. Influence of financial oligarchy. Loans and public debt provided a means for the financial oligarchy to influence the policies of the bourgeois state, reinforcing their power and wealth.